Now, during the winter months when life on the homestead slows down a little bit, January is the perfect time to do some canning. So join me during the entire month of January for the CANUARY 2024 video collaboration. Hey friends, it's Barbara Sue at Kowalski Mountain and welcome back to our channel. Now during the month of January, I'm going to be celebrating CANUARY with several of my YouTube friends in a CANUARY collaboration. Now I want you to be sure to check out the description box below so you can see all of their channels and all of the videos that we're going to post throughout the month. Now I'm also going to be doing a special playlist, which you can see it right up here, where you can easily follow along with all of the videos. Now just so you know, CANUARY's kind of a popular thing, and there are some other collaborations that have giveaways. And while we appreciate you watching all of our CANUARY videos, we are not a part of the giveaway collaboration. Now, one of the best things about home canning is that you can preserve items that make your everyday cooking so much easier. And one of my favorite things to can is broth. Now, when you go to the grocery store and you purchase broth, it may not seem that expensive, but when you learn about how it's made, it's actually kind of an expensive purchase, and it's so easy to make. Now today we're going to make two kinds of broths. We're going to make chicken broth in the InstaPot, and we're going to be making venison broth in the roasting oven. So we're going to look at two methods of making broth, and we're going to preserve it by pressure canning. So let's get started. Now hunting season here in Kentucky is wrapping up, and Philip has been working on filling up our freezer with venison. Now we like to use as much as we possibly can from the animals that we harvest. Now one of the things that I'm going to be making for the first time is I'm going to be making venison bone broth. Now I had Philip keep a few of the bones from the last animal that we harvested, and I've already roasted them in the oven. Now they cooked for about 2 hours in the oven, and I didn't season it at all. Now I had to get a little bit creative to fit this in my oven. You can see I wrapped the ends of the bones in foil so they would not drip on my oven. By roasting the bones, we're going to get the best flavor for our venison broth. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to take our roasted venison bones. I've got some leg bones. Honestly, I don't know what these are. And I'm just going to fit those down into the bottom of my roasting oven. Now I also roasted up some scrap venison. This was pieces that Philip had cut off of the meat that we were going to just throw into the scrap pile. This is full of lots of nutrients that will continue to add wonderful flavor to my bone broth. Now I want to fit these in here as well as I can so that they can be completely submerged in the water. And I'm also going to take the drippings from roasting these bones and add it to my venison broth. Now, one of the really nice things about making your own broth is you can flavor it however you'd like. Now, I like to keep my broth rather simple. I'm not going to add a bunch of spices to it. I'm going to add some simple ingredients just for a touch of flavor, but I don't want the broth to have such a distinctive flavor of seasonings that everything I make tastes the same. So for that reason, we're going to keep this pretty simple. Now, broth can be made with scraps. Now, rather than use a full carrot, I could just use the carrot peelings, and I do, but I'm out of those. So today I'm just going to rough chop a few carrots and an onion and throw it into the roasting oven. Now I washed my vegetables, but I didn't peel them. I also didn't take off the tops. I'm going to leave the tops right on there. Now I only want to lightly season this, so I'm not going to put a bunch in here. Now I have an onion. I'm going to chop this up, skins and all, and throw it in my broth. Now I'm also going to be adding some salt, and I'm using Redmond's real salt. And I buy my salt in 10-pound buckets so that we have plenty on hand. Now this is a real salt. It's not a canning salt. It's not an iodized salt. It has real nutrients straight from the ocean salt that is harvested right here in Utah. Now one of the things about using real salt is it doesn't have any preservatives in it to keep it from clumping. So it clumps. That's not really a big deal. We just crush them back up. Now I don't really have a plan for how much salt I'm going to put in this. I'm just going to add some. Now lastly, I'm going to add some peppercorns. And if you watch my last Azure Standard haul, which you can see right up here, I bought peppercorns and it was just for things exactly like this. And we're just going to take a few. We're going to throw them in. Now one of the other things I like to add to my broth is celery, but I'm completely out, so no celery today. Now I could add some celery seed, but it's very fine seasoning and I don't think it'll strain well when I strain my broth, so I'm going to skip it. Now we're going to add water. Now I want to add enough water to completely cover my bones. Now this is an 18-quart roasting oven, and based on the space of the ingredients, I'm probably going to make 10, maybe 15 quarts of broth. Now I'm actually going to be canning it mostly in pint jars because that just fits our family's needs better. All right. Now that is about as full as I can get it. My bones are down in my water. Now one final ingredient that we're gonna add is our apple cider vinegar. And this is going to help all the bones and leach out the minerals, so that will become a part of our nutrient-rich bone broth. Now we're gonna simply cover this up and let it cook. Now right now my roasting oven is on about 350, and that's because I want this to come up to temperature and start simmering. Now once that happens, I'm going to turn this down and we're going to cook it low and slow. Now broth you can cook for as long as you want to. I'm going to cook it for at least 10 to 12 hours, possibly overnight. We'll see. Possibly. The most nutrient bone broth is going to be cooked for at least 24 hours. Now we're on solar here, and so I need to be a good steward of my electricity, and it's already a cloudy day outside. I wish it was not. I wish it was bright and sunny, and then I would feel better about running this roasting oven all day long. But homesteading doesn't wait. Sometimes we have to do things when things are ready to be done. And today is broth making day. Now we're going to let this go, and once this is fully cooked, we'll be back to finish the canning process. So here's a little update. This has been cooking about 7 hours so far. And I did just add some celery after we went to the grocery store. We're going to let this keep on cooking. Now while that venison broth is cooking, I want to show you my absolute favorite way to make broth. Now I am aware that not everyone has access to venison bones. Keep in mind that the method I showed you for making broth in the roasting oven works for all kinds of broth. You can use beef bones, which you can get at your local butcher. I used to make all of my chicken and turkey broth in the roasting oven or even on the stove in a large pot. The roasting oven makes it easy to do a lot of broth, which is what I needed to do with the venison bones because they were too large for my favorite method, which is the InstaPot. And what I would do is I would save all of my chicken carcasses, and when I had enough to fill the roasting oven, I would make broth. But the InstaPot is so easy to make broth. Rather than wait and collect chicken carcasses in my freezer, I go ahead and make a single small batch right in the InstaPot. And this method is amazing. I wish I had tried it years ago. It's so much faster than the more traditional method that you're seeing with the venison broth. So let's see how easy it is. Now, when you consider what broth actually is, it's actually pretty expensive. I'm going to be making today's chicken broth completely from scratch with a few spices from the kitchen. Recently, when I was shopping on Azure Standard, I looked up that a 32-ounce carton of chicken broth is almost $5. Now, I realize $5 isn't a ton of money, but if you use 2 cartons a month, that's $10 a month. And that's $120 a year that you have spent on chicken broth. And instead, I'm going to make it from things I was going to throw away. So the first thing I have is a chicken carcass. Now, we raise our own meat, so I always have whole chickens. But you could use the bones from any bone chicken. It doesn't have to be a whole carcass like this. Now, unlike the venison broth, I do not roast the chicken carcasses. You could, but I don't. Now, the other ingredient we're going to use in this chicken broth is scraps. So I have some scraps of celery. You know, these are, no one likes to eat these, but they make really good soup additives. I've got some peelings from carrots. When I peeled some carrots, and I was going to use the carrots for something else. And then I also have the peels from a single onion and the ends. Now, I'm also going to put in a few peppercorns and a little bit of salt, as well as my apple cider vinegar. So let's put it together. The apple cider vinegar is completely optional. It does help the nutrients get leached out of the bones, which is why it's added, but consider it optional. Now, with the InstaPot, every InstaPot has a maximum fill zone. So you don't want to overfill past the fill zone of your InstaPot. And we're just going to fill it up with water to the top of the fill zone. Now, that's all you need for broth. Now, as I told you before during the venison portion, I don't like to overspice my broth because if you put a lot of seasonings in your broth, everything you make will have the same flavor palette. So I like to kind of keep it a little bit simple, just a little bit of extra flavoring, and call it good. And then every meal I make can be flavored appropriately. Now, the nice thing about the InstaPot method, if you don't want to go through the process of canning your broth, you can do this in such a small batch. I mean, this is only going to make a few quarts of broth. You can freeze it. You can just put it in the refrigerator. If you use a lot of broth, just put it in the fridge and use it as you make it. Now, I'm just going to press everything down into that water the best I can. The chicken broth, the chicken carcass is going to stick up a little bit above. And there we go. Now let's get this lid on and get this thing going. Now this is the only InstaPot I have. I'm assuming they work pretty similarly. Now my InstaPot does have a soup and broth setting, but I prefer the meat and stew setting to make broth. Now once we've started that, it's just going to cook. Now the really nice thing about using the InstaPot is this is going to cook a lot faster. Now my venison bone broth is cooking for a 24-hour time period, but this is only going to cook for about 2 hours. Now how does that work? A InstaPot is a pressure cooker. So just like a pressure cooker or a pressure canner, it builds up pressure inside of the InstaPot. So it's cooking at a lot higher heat and allows you to cook it at a much faster pace. That's why they say you can cook a frozen whole chicken in no time at all, is because of the way it cooks. And that's why it's going to make this broth so much quicker. Now that's also why it's my favorite method. This does not take much effort at all. Throw it together, and in a couple of hours, we're going to have broth. 24 hours has passed since I started the venison bone broth, and I went ahead and let it go all night just to have the best flavor possible. Now let's open it up and see how it looks. Now this is looking perfect. Now the first thing we need to do is we need to strain this out and cool it down. Look at that color. I'm just going to strain this into a pot. And I can kind of feel like I'm getting caught up on these bones. So I'm going to pull the bones out just to make it a little bit easier to scoop. And I'm going to keep straining my broth. Now I want to cool my broth, and I want to put it into smaller trays so that it'll cool faster. Now it's a nice cold day today. It's only about 37 degrees, so I'm going to put this outside to cool. Now when I'm making chicken broth, I don't cool it like this, but this is venison broth and it's got quite a bit of fat in it that we want to remove. And while I don't want to trap the heat in, I've got cats. Just saying. Now I'm going to keep straining. Alright, after this cools, we will be back for the next step. And I do want to show you what I'm doing outside. Rather than cover it with the foil, I decided to cover it with a cookie rack. And that should keep any curious kitties out of my venison broth. Now the InstaPot is finished, and the best thing about this is it's zero fuss. You just turn it on and you can go about your business. Now let's open it up. Now we're going to go ahead and strain it out. Now the InstaPot just makes a small batch of broth. There's probably 3, maybe 4 quarts of broth here. Maybe. And if you use it up quickly, you can just keep it in the refrigerator and use it throughout your week. You can make your rice and whatever it is you want to cook with, right with your broth. Now I'm going to go ahead and pressure can it. That makes it shelf stable so that I can save it for a day when I need some. Alright, now my venison broth has been cooling for quite a while, and it finally has a thick layer of fat on the top. Now, we don't care for venison fat, and you really shouldn't can fat anyway. The reason we chilled this recipe and not the chicken broth recipe was because of the fat. The chicken has very little fat in it, and it doesn't change the flavor, but venison fat does, so we need to remove that. Now I can run this through my strainer again to get any more of the fat out. A little is going to be okay. Too much is a problem, so I'm not going to get super stressed out about it. Now another thing I did when I was skimming that fat off, put this on the foil that I had covered that pot with, because tallow is a pain in the neck to wash off of anything, so it won't get my plate dirty. Now that that is skimmed, I'm going to go ahead and warm that back up, and I'm going to start loading my canning jars. Now the reason that I'm heating this back up is because I don't want to create thermal shock in my jars. Now I'm not going to heat it up too much, just a little, just so it's not freezing cold, so I'm not putting everything into cold jars into my warm canner. Now the broth has been heating on the stove, and I've done all the prep work for the lids. Now today I'm going to be using my Harvest Guard canning lids, and these take a little extra TLC. Now I have a video all about how to use these canning lids right up here. Now broth has to be pressure canned. You cannot heat broth hot enough to kill any bacteria or organisms in it by water bath canning, because it'll never be hotter than boiling water. But a pressure canner uses pressure and steam to heat it to a higher level, which is why we can in the pressure canner using meats and broths. Now first we're going to get these filled up and into the pressure canner. Now I've got my canning funnel, and I'm just going to fill it up to within 1 inch of the top. Now I have a washcloth. This is clean and it's wet with only water. I'm going to wipe the rim. And then I have a paper towel that is soaked with white vinegar, just to make sure there's nothing on there that would prevent our jars from sealing. Now with our harvest guard lids, we turn it until the jar turns, and that's it. You don't want to over tighten this at all. Now I really like canning outside because I don't have any space limitations out there, but it's pretty cold today. That's the bad thing about Canuary, is that it's cold outside, and I probably would have done it except it's super windy. So we're canning inside today. Now with my 23 quart Presto canner, I can double stack my pint jars. Now you can just offset the jars on the second layer on the rims of the other layer below it, but I like to use my rack. It makes it a lot easier to double stack. Now this was a very small purchase to add to my canner, definitely worth it. Now we're just going to get these jars filled up and get this thing started. All right, the canner is full. And I have to tell you, for many years I canned with a Presto I think it's a 16 quart canner that does a single layer of jars. If you can spring for the larger 23 quart canner, I highly recommend that you get that. It makes it so much better. You can knock out twice as much with your pint jars as you can with the smaller canner, so it's definitely worth it. All right, so I've already got the heat on. Once this starts to vent, we will vent it for 10 minutes, and then after it vents, we will put on the weight, which I use a weighted pressure gauge on my dial canner. Now the reason I do that is because I don't have to watch it like a hawk. This will self-regulate the pressure in here without me having to make sure that the pressure maintains the right pressure. This is also an add-on to your pressure canner. Very much worth it. All right, we're going to let this heat up and then we'll get this pressure canned. Now the processing time for pint jars is 20 minutes. Now the chicken broth is canned exactly like the venison broth. You follow the same length of time as you would for any kind of broth. And actually I do have some leftover venison broth from the other day that I'm going to can all at the same time because I knew I'd put another batch through the pressure canner. I can a lot of things in pint jars because it works best for our family. Now one of my favorite jars is the 1.5 pint jar. These are hard to come by and they're kind of expensive, so I very much covet these. These are my favorite jar, and usually if I'm going to can broth in any other size, I do it in this. Now I'm also going to do some quart jars today. I was looking at my jar stash and I don't have a ton of pint jars, so I'm going to use up some of my quarts today. Now when you process 1.5 pint jars, you do them for the same time as a quart jar. So these are going to be 25 minutes in the pressure canner. So I'm going to get this last load into the pressure canner and we'll come back at the end of the video to do a seal check. If you're interested in how those harvest guard lids are sealing, be sure to stay to the very end to see it. Well, my broth making is completely done, and I've waited more than 24 hours since I finished canning. So now we can successfully take off the rings. Now, if you're not familiar, the rings on your canning jars are only to hold the lids on during the canning process. Once they're finished, you need to remove the rings for storage. Now, you always want to check your seals. And the one thing about the Harvest Guard seals is they don't have that satisfying ping when they seal. But you can check the seals by grabbing a hold of the lid itself and just checking it. It should stay on there. Now, you want to do that carefully so not to break your jar or spill the contents of it. I got 18 pints of venison broth and a single quart. So that's a total of 10 quarts of broth that I made in my 18-quart roasting oven. In the InstaPot, I made a much smaller amount. So from my InstaPot, I was able to get 3.5 quarts total broth. So that's a much smaller batch, but it's also much more user-friendly to make. And I personally like doing it in the InstaPot best. Now, anytime I do a video with my Harvest Guard lids, I always do a seal check because I know people are curious if these lids really work. So let's check them out. We're just going to check each one very carefully. And you don't have to be afraid to pull. You're not going to accidentally pull it off. It's either going to stay or it's not. Now, my venison broth, I'm going to use just like I would beef broth. And my chicken broth, obviously, I use anytime chicken broth is called for. So far, we're doing good with our seal rate. So that's 100% of the venison broth that's sealed up. Let's check the chicken broth. Oh, one. We were so close. So I had one not seal. Now this one will go into the refrigerator and we'll just use it up first. There's all kinds of reasons they might not have sealed. I might have had a little bit of something on it, and I kind of knew it wasn't going to be sealed because when I took off the ring, I could hear movement. So I kind of thought for sure it would come off, and it did. But that's okay. We're going to use this up. It won't go to waste. Now, don't forget to be sure to watch all of the people that are in my CANUARY Collaboration and check out their videos. Be sure to check out their links below, and also I have a playlist for you right here. As always, friends, I really appreciate you watching our videos, especially to the very end. Thanks so much for being a part of the Kowalski Mountain family. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, join us. Hit that button. We'd love you to be part of our group. We'll see you next time.